I don't think many people know that the iPhone 11 was the second most shipped smartphone in 2019 and the most shipped smartphone in 2020. We're talking upwards of 100 million units shipped in about a year. Just for comparison's sake, the iPhone 6 is the best-selling smartphone ever, and in total, Apple sold 222 million units of those. So 100 million iPhone 11s, needless to say, is a lot. Many people bought this phone despite it getting a bit of flack for having a, well, mediocre screen at best. But that seems to be the theme of this phone. It does a good job of doing pretty much everything you would want a modern smartphone to do, but it's only really good at one of those things. For instance, if you take a look at this phone from the outside, you'll see that it has an aluminum frame and normal Gorilla Glass on both sides. It doesn't have a stainless steel frame or something fancy like ceramic shield or even a matte finish on the back, the things you would expect to see in a newer Pro model iPhone. But at the same time, these materials are not terrible. Glass still feels premium unlike plastic, and many Android phones still use aluminum frames, so it's good enough. It is also IP68 water and dust resistant, meaning it should be okay for 30 minutes if fully submerged in fresh water up to 2 meters of depth, which is better than IP67, and while not quite as water resistant as some of the newer iPhones, it's more than enough for what I think most people would actually need, including myself. I also think this phone looks good. I wouldn't say it looks ugly or gorgeous. I think the design's fairly minimal and nothing too flashy, which I kinda like. Now, coming back to the screen. Yes, it's not great. It's a 6.1-inch LCD screen with basically a 720p resolution, or 1792 by 828p to be exact. And just by hearing 720p LCD, you automatically think that it's a terrible screen. At least that's what I thought until I used this phone myself. Then very quickly realized that I was simply wrong. The screen may not have phenomenal viewing angles or pure blacks, but it is color accurate, has decent contrast, and it's fairly sharp. You won't see individual pixels or anything like that from a normal viewing distance. With a peak brightness of 625 nits, it gets bright enough to be visible outdoors and dark enough to be used indoors. Reading text on this phone has never been an issue, and the 6.1-inch screen size makes typing on this phone a joy. However, I will say that, at least for me, this phone feels a little too big in the hand. I don't feel very comfortable using it with just one hand. Maybe because I don't have huge hands, or maybe I'm just used to my XS, which has a smaller footprint. This phone is lacking 120Hz though, something you would expect to see on pretty much every new smartphone today. But I think as long as your current phone also doesn't have a high refresh rate screen, you shouldn't have any problems switching over to this phone, because not having 120Hz doesn't make this phone feel slow in any way. The A13 Bionic inside is one fast and powerful chip. It just flies through everyday tasks like calling, texting, browsing, stuff like that. And when it comes to gaming, I was able to play Call of Duty on the best frame rate settings and the best graphic settings without any frame drops, lag, or anything like that. So everything from iOS animations to playing graphically intensive games feels super smooth on this device. The performance of this phone is like a solid level 4. And I'm only really saying that because I know that the iPhone 12 and 13 also exist, which in theory are a little bit more powerful and just better than this phone. But if they didn't exist, I probably would have said 4 plus, because there's really nothing to complain about. This phone is just as powerful as the iPhone 11 Pro because it has the same processor and the same amount of RAM. Now, speaking of the iPhone 11 Pro, you may know that it has really good battery life because it has a larger battery than the iPhone XS, and because of its processor, it's very efficient, which brings me to my most important point. The thing this phone does the best, in my opinion, is battery life. There's a 3110 mAh battery inside this phone, which is physically larger than its predecessor, the iPhone XR, and its bigger brother, the iPhone 11 Pro, both of which I have reviewed before and found their battery life to be phenomenal. So knowing that the iPhone 11 has a larger battery than both of them, I knew exactly what to expect from this phone, and it didn't disappoint. With 85% battery health, this phone managed to get around 8 hours of screen on time, which is really good. Normally, if a phone can get around 5 hours of screen on time, it's considered to have good battery life. But if your phone's getting like more than 7 hours of screen on time, it's on a whole nother level. Like, that's great battery life. So I can confidently say that this phone will get you through your day on a single charge. Big thumbs up for the battery life. Just one thing to know, if you're planning to buy this phone, and if you're planning to buy one used, try to get one with at least 80% battery health. But The higher it is, the better. Now, just before we talk about the cameras, I want to tell you about Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with literally thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. Maybe you want to learn how to take great photos or edit videos on your smartphone, or maybe learn graphic designing, cooking, freelancing, time management, or maybe something else. The point is, if you have a skill that you're trying to learn, Skillshare is the perfect place to start. The first course I ever watched on Skillshare was MKBHD's course called YouTube Success, and I learned so many things that honestly would have taken me potentially years to learn on my own through trial and error. Because some of the tips and tricks Mark has shared in that course, I presume took him many years of trial and error to get right and to find something that really works. So for me, watching that course was kind of like a shortcut. And full transparency, I watched that course way before Skillshare even reached out to me. So I genuinely like Skillshare and recommend it. Most people who make these courses are professionals at what they do, often with years and years of experience. And that's what I think makes Skillshare worth it. So the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description or code TechWalt will get a 1-month free trial. And thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Okay, so when it comes to cameras, I don't think they're the best of the best, but they're also not terrible. This phone has 3 cameras in total, a 12 megapixel selfie camera and a 12 megapixel wide angle and ultra wide angle camera on the back. If you're gonna put 2 cameras on the back, I firmly believe that this is the way to do it. A wide angle and an ultra wide, because this offers the widest range of focal length, all the way from 13mm to 260mm, because although this phone doesn't have a telephoto camera, you can still technically zoom in up to 10 times on the main camera. And the ultra wide angle camera can also be used as a macro camera, except this phone doesn't have that feature. Now, overall, I think the photos and videos from these cameras look very nice. The dynamic range is pretty good. The phone does a good job of exposing for the highlights and the shadows at the same time. Photos are also sharp, but not over sharpened, and colors look natural most of the times. But most importantly, this phone has night mode, so you can be sure to take good photos in low light as well. But it's important to note that it's limited to the main camera, so you can't use it with the ultra-wide or the selfie camera. Now, the ultra-wide angle camera is definitely not as good as the main camera, but I'm okay with that because the 120 degrees of field of view it offers is very useful and something the main camera simply cannot do. Lastly, the selfie camera is exceptional. I don't find myself using it a lot, but whenever I do, I certainly like the results. So the big question, is the iPhone 11 worth buying in 2022? Well, if you ask me, I would say yes it is. But maybe don't buy one brand new because although I like this phone overall, I personally don't think it's worth almost 700 Canadian dollars. So if you can, avoid buying one that's brand new and maybe get yourself some AirPods or something from the money you save. And thank me later. But that's all for this video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and I'll see you later.